Hello, I'm Dr. Basil Considine. I'm here from the ACU Online Writing Center, and today we're going to be talking about how to discuss image details in APA style. In particular, how to discuss image details concisely, because you can write an awful lot of prose about an image that people can't see. But if they can see the specific thing that you're talking about very clearly, then you don't need to spend nearly as many words and details and space that you might otherwise be using for key aspects of your paper. So let's go ahead and start by looking at part two of Commo 376, week one, assignment one, the Genogram Project. Now, this is a assignment that we have another webinar that talks about the part for drawing a genogram, but we're going to discuss how to reference, how to talk about, how to explain things that you have captured in the image as part of this webinar. So let's take a look at that assignment. And this is coming from the family communication course. And it starts with telling you a little bit about what a genogram is and a way to create it, and a little bit about the functions of it, why you would want to have this to highlight particular features that cross from individual lives to other ones and show a pattern. And it's one of the main reasons why you might create a genogram. Now, you're not required to make a genogram of your own family or someone else. You could make something up. You can follow a novel, TV series, and you'll see that we have an example that is coming from the TV series later. But for the particular requirements of this assignment, you're going to want to have this set of details in there. And you won't see all of these in our example here, but you'll want to include them in the one you're creating for your assignment. Now, if we're looking at the assignment instructions for how to discuss this, it starts out saying should be APA formatted, and that's going to be 2 to 5 pages in length. That's a fair swing. So just be aware that there are families that are larger and more complex and families that are smaller, and that the degree of discussion is probably going to depend in no small part on that family size. So you have a fair amount of detail, but that is going to be driven in part by the genogram that you create for this. And so if we look at this, we see that you're charged with following a pattern. Now, what that pattern will be, don't know. You get to choose that. But looking at this, we see a wide set of choices: communication issues, health issues, how long you live, occupations, geography, religion, spirituality, ethnicity, marriage and divorce, triangulations, things that are coming together, linchpins. Immigration is one where you can see different patterns in the family moving or where people live that you could be tracking in this, as well as family disorders. Now you want to be discussing more than one pattern, and that's probably going to involve different areas of the genogram. So let's talk about how to include and cite figures in APA style. Now, just a reminder that however you create your genogram, there's a standard vocabulary of symbols and abbreviations that this assignment is asking you to use. And so be aware that the particular examples that we're using here may not fully capture or reflect this, but you'll see that it is standardized, so you should recognize some things in the examples we show. Now, as far as APA style is concerned, first off, there's just the basic formatting. When you include an image, we call it a figure in APA style, and so those get numbered sequentially. So the first one in your paper is going to be figure 1, next will be figure 2, figure 3, etc. If you go back and add a new figure in the middle, you need to update the numbering accordingly. But that number, the label saying figure 1, figure 2, etc., should be on its own line of text, flush left, and bolded. We'll look at what that manifests as in a moment. And it should also be labeled with a brief descriptive title, like Genogram of Ross Geller's family. And that should be, again, on its own line of text, flush left, italicized, and in title case. And when you refer to the image in the text, you want to refer to it as figure 1, figure 2, etc. That brief descriptive title, that's just for when the figure appears. When you're referencing it, just use figure 1, figure 2, etc. And the image itself should follow the number and label and also be flush left. So if you want more detail on that, I've included a link to the official APA style guidelines for including figures, and we have an annotated thing here. Now, since you're going to be generating your own figure, you're probably not going to have any notes at the bottom, because usually the notes are giving explanations for something that is unusual or talking about the source of the image if it's not something created. But you will be creating this, and you should be including the legend in the figure itself. Now, how to use multiple figures and multiple figure details in APA style, that's going to be the next part of our discussion here. So I've included a couple links to images that you can consider later, but we're going to be starting with this genogram from All of Me Counseling, where they did a slightly simplified version of, actually, I say slightly simplified. There's a whole lot more dating in here that's not captured here. This is a generalized relationship diagram, and you'll note that there are some people that are left out to highlight the most key aspects. Now, if you were comparing this to what the assignment asks you to do, you want things like birth and death years as applicable. The timelines on TV shows are a little bit loose, because this is a show that ran for many years on television, and some of those television years don't really line up with the year in the life of the character, because they like to have Christmas every holiday season and things like that. But this gives us something to discuss here, so we'll use it as an example. Now, you'll note that there is we have divorces is marked. If we were to go back and look at our notation here, we have separation marked with 1 and dash, divorce marked with 2, widowed with an X. And so be aware that this particular line here is showing things with some slightly different notation. So there is separation, that really should be divorce, I think, for these two examples that we see. That's this hash and this hash. And this here, that looks like it's divorce. Well, yes, technically we're remarried. That's a little bit tricky to try and track here. So you see that that's using 2 colors here. All right, now anything like that, like, okay, that's a very unusual feature that might want to have some more detailed discussion on. Or let's say that you were looking at these relationships here. What is it? Critical, critical, critical. And where will you go with that? Well, that is the kind of thing that you might decide, okay, I want to specifically discuss that, and it'll be a whole lot easier if people could see exactly the thing that I'm discussing here. And so you might have what we call a detail on that image. It's the same image, but it's being cropped and zoomed in to make those relationships very clear. So if this is our figure 1, genogram of Ross-Geller's family, then we have, when it comes up to be discussed, figure 2, genogram of Ross-Geller's family, detail on central friendships. And then in your text, you might have something like what we have on the right-hand side. As shown in figure 2, Ross's central friendships involve Rachel, Monica, and Chandler. His on and off dating relationship with Rachel is a source of ongoing tension and drama, etc., etc., etc. Now, if we are looking at this, you might say, oh, okay, Joey and Phoebe are also included as well. But that's going to be a question for how you're creating this. And size is one of those ways that you can indicate the relative importance of different relationships. We'll note here that Joey and Phoebe, they're on there, they're in there, but those circles and squares aren't as large as the ones with whom there are these more direct connections. And of course, Ross, as our central character, has the double line. So in this case, because he's male, double square. And so he's highlighted in this. Now, let's say we were looking at a health genogram instead. And so we have this genogram of Janet's family. Again, if you're drawing this for your own assignment, there are more details than you'll want to include. But in this case, we have Janet highlighted there with an arrow. Now, if this is going to be Janice or Janet as the focus, you're going to want to, according to the assignment and instructions, you're going to want to have a double circle around Janice if she's the focus, and a double circle around Janet if she's the focus. Now, this particular notation used an arrow, but again, be aware of what the requirements are for this assignment. And because people create genograms for all sorts of reasons, anyone that you find on the internet is probably not going to have exactly the things that you want for this assignment. So just keep that in mind. But well, how would we describe this in the text? Oh, a genogram of Janice or Janet's family shows that family members are generally long-lived. If we look at that top generation, we see, yeah, we got people making it up into the late 80s and 90s. They're generally long-lived, but deal with serious medical conditions. See figure 3, and that tells the reader, oh, the genogram you're referring to is that figure you've mentioned. You can also have a detail on that. So, for example, if you had this text, a notable feature shown in the genogram is a cluster of cancer cases starting in the second generation with siblings Patricia and Janice, and continuing with Patricia's daughter Jasper. See figure 4. So now you've called their attention to this detailed figure that you have. It's just a zoom in on part of the previous one, but it makes it very easy to see, oh, yes, there's Patricia, there's Janice, there's Jasper. And then you have your additional discussion. Okay, what does that mean? Like, this suggests that there may be a genetic or environmental component to this increased incidence. You know, there are genetic mutations that can happen that are passed to the family, or a recessive gene that somebody accumulates 2 copies of, and so it's much more likely to be passed on. You know, these things are one of the reasons why we develop a genogram, to create a suspicion that there might be something else to look into or to provide an avenue of treatment. And so, again, if we're to go back, this is presenting, hey, here's all the information. Here's a point that we're going to be discussing. And the key thing is that whenever you include a figure, you should always mention it in the text. And you should include the figure because it has some key details that you will be discussing. So if you keep that in mind, you can have multiple details on the same figure, just as you're probably going to be discussing multiple aspects of this. You might decide that, you know, and you can even provide a more detailed genogram with additional detail for other people if there's something that is particularly of incident and interest. An example of that is you say, okay, well, here's the overall one. And then for this group of people, here are these other details that are provided because this is the thing of interest. And that's primarily a function of space and clarity. I think for this assignment, you'll probably just want to create one genogram because it is asking for an extensive set of information. But you know, once you've identified those 3 patterns, if they don't happen to all involve the same exact group of people, it's entirely possible that you'll want to have multiple details on the figures just to highlight that, or a figure that you annotate, perhaps with highlighting, to show those details and have them pop out for easier discussion. So that's really all we have here. You know, to discuss a figure, you need to first include it. And APA style has its particular rules about how we label the figure number with bold. The figure title or label is going to be in italics in title case. We do want to have a legend to explain anything that is not very obvious at the onset. And this particular assignment does require that you have a detailed legend or key. And then if you were to have gotten this image from somewhere else, you would want to include a citation for that in the note. But since you are creating this originally for this assignment, you probably wouldn't have any notes after the figure. All right, so just to recap, when you are discussing a figure, you're not limited to just one image of it. You can do zoom ins, you can do modified versions of it. Just make sure that the title, in this case, we have the general genogram of Rothschilder's family. This one, we have that subtitle, detail on central friendships, that helps us establish not just that this is a different version of the preceding image, but it calls attention to the things that you're trying to highlight, in this case, the central friendships. And in this case, highlighting the cancer cluster, and the incidence of 3 cases that we really don't see cancer anywhere else there. And what may have changed, that's a question from before, but we see that lymphoma, which is closely related, that lymphoma shows up in the previous generation. And so you might have something saying, okay, well, although ovarian cancer and breast cancer are notably different from lymphoma, if we're taking the general idea of there is a neomorphic condition involved, you might have detail on this that includes Candace's lymphoma in there. Because certainly there's a generational line, so there may be a genetic component, perhaps a oncogene mutation, or a cancer or tumor suppressor gene mutation. So that's something to consider for later as you're working on this. And whatever you choose to highlight, that is something to include and discuss, and that will help build out your paper. Keep in mind that for this particular assignment, you're limited by word count, not by number of pages, because figures do take up a bit of space, but it's the discussion of them that is so important. You don't want to ever include a figure without discussing it, because then the reader doesn't know what is important about it or why it is key to your argument. So with that in mind, if you have any questions, feel free to send us an email at onlinewritingcenter@acu.edu, or to sign up for an appointment by going to my.acu.edu. Under Academic Resources, select Online Writing Center, and then signing up for an appointment. Hope to see you soon.